So what's it like when a family member goes missing? Joining me now is George Holland, whose great aunt, Nellie Heriot, went missing in Brighton at the age of 96 3 years ago. Her disappearance is still unexplained. George Holland, morning to you.
Good morning.
Tell us a wee bit about great Aunt Nellie, first of all.
Well, she was a very plucky, vivacious lady. She was a spinster, fiercely independent. She got to a grand age and frequented the Brighton Hove buses on a daily basis, so it was quite, I suppose, expected that the last recorded sighting of her was actually getting off the Brighton Hove bus. But the location was out of the normal. It was Whitehawk rather than the area she lived in. And from there, she vanished into thin air, apparently. There's been absolutely no trace of her whatsoever.
What do you think yourself? What do you think happened to Nellie?
Well, I find it very hard to believe that she was not a victim of crime, simply because surely by now, had she gone missing and lost somewhere or had an accident, dead or alive, she would have been found eventually. I'm absolutely convinced of that. And the fact that there's been no trace of her at all, I find very suspicious.
How do you think the case was handled? Was enough resource put onto finding her at the time, do you think?
Well, I think initially there was a very concerted effort to search the immediate locality of where she was recorded getting off the bus in the Whitehawk estate. I believe the numbers ran into several dozens of police officers. However, thereafter, although there was I understand a visit made to every property in that area towards the end of August 2012. There was no lead, and I think, to be fair, the case had hit the buffers. It reached a dead end, and I think also the use of Twitter, I think perhaps trivialised the matter to an extent. It was, on the one hand, heartening that complete strangers were expressing sympathy and heartwarming comments online, but on the other hand, it wasn't actually, it didn't appear to be encouraging people to come forward with actual information, actual sightings. That was the frustration, I think.
Yeah, and here's the thing, an elderly lady literally vanishing in, the centre of the city, really, essentially.
Well, I think it's quite frightening because let's face it, she was a very, very grand age, physically still mobile, but it was obvious that she was not 100% physically fit at that age. And amongst the hustle and bustle of a busy city like Brighton, and I think one thing which seldom was mentioned at the time, I must say, in the publicity the case received, the fact that on that day, St George's Day 2012, the weather was absolutely horrendous. It was gales and rain, and where she got off the bus, she would have had to have climbed a very steep hill to get to where she actually lived. And very ominously, for some reason, she had left her bus pass at home, and therefore I wonder whether she had the money to actually get on a bus, even though she was visibly old enough to qualify for free passage on the bus. I wonder whether she was perhaps declined a ride on the bus by a pedantic driver, and therefore was trying to fight her way up a steep hill in wind and rain in an area of Brighton which has a reputation for being less than civilised, shall we say.
Okay, all right. I'm sure people in Whitehawk might disagree with you on that point, but I know that the point you're trying to make. And so 3 years on, this is a continuing situation for the family. So how do you feel about the fact that, maybe the police are reviewing the case every 6 months, but you still have no news? Do you think you may never get news?
I honestly don't think we will. I would say, in defence of the Sussex Police, the detective sergeant who has kept in touch with us has communicated with us with absolute courtesy and politeness. I have no issue with that at all. However, I am not at all hopeful that we're going to get an answer to this mystery. And I think the part of the reason is that, as your discussion has been going over this morning, there's only a finite amount of money available to the public sector. I work in the public sector. I'm perfectly aware there is a chronic shortage of funding, a government addicted to austerity, and therefore hard decisions have to be made, don't they?
But I suppose with Nellie, you know, once she got off that bus, if there's been no sighting, nobody's come forward. Sometimes the police just have to kind of admit defeat, don't they? That they just don't know what happened to her and they can't find out what did happen to her.
Well, yes, I suppose it's something they can't possibly do, is it? They cannot actually publicly say we've given up.
No.
I think for us that would be most unsatisfactory and distressing, and I think other people would also be rather concerned and alarmed if it happened to an elderly relation of theirs, if there was the possibility that it was a case of, oh, well, you know, we did what we could. I think, you know, again, if money wasn't an issue, I'm sure the search could have gone much further and wider.
Yeah. I tell you
but it didn't.
And information, always an issue. And I tell you what, George, let's not pass up this opportunity just to remind people, if they know anything, what they should do. So just repeat where it was, what Nellie was like, and what people should do if they know absolutely anything, no matter how small the detail.
Well, it's a case of the last recorded sighting of my great aunt Nellie Harriet was getting off the 1A bus in Whitehawk. It was just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon on St. George's Day 2012, the 23rd of April. And if by any chance they have any knowledge of any sighting, any knowledge of what might have happened to her, something is better than nothing. So the people to contact, if it's Crime Stoppers, if they want to speak to somebody in confidence, or they can contact the Sussex Police directly. And we're always hopeful, no matter how slim the hope, that perhaps one day we're going to know what actually did happen. Yeah,
she's had a long life, and to not know what's happened in the last 3 years must be very painful for the family. Can you share one memory with us, George, of a moment or a time that's particularly sort of stays with you?
Well, there were numerous occasions. She had a very sharp sense of humour. I think she was quoted as saying at the time of her retirement, which of course would be a very long time ago now, back in the 1970s, she was quoted as saying to her sister, my grandmother, when asked what was she going to do with her retirement then, and her response was, I'm going to do what I bloody well like. I hope you don't mind me using that word at this time of the morning. But
if she said it, then I'm happy to hear it.
Yes, that was her spirit, and she was a glass half full type of person rather than a glass half empty. And I think the saddest thing of all is that you've got somebody there with all that spark, a zest for life, and missing, let's face it, presumed dead, and we don't have the opportunity to give her a decent send-off. It's a limbo situation. There's no opportunity to have a proper memorial to her, nothing. And I think it's tragic. I think with the passing of time, the family are accepting of the fact very unlikely we're going to know what happened to her or see her again. But at the same time, going back to the discussion of efforts to find missing people, I very much agree with what the lady from the charity was saying about the fact that often somebody who's missing is in a vulnerable situation. And I certainly am convinced that my poor old aunt most definitely was in a vulnerable situation when she went missing. And I think it's a terrible age we live in when a price is put on somebody's life in terms of weighing up whether or not a certain amount of time can be expended on finding them. That is the reality we live in, but I think is a rather cruel world when we have to put a price on how expensive it's going to be to find out where somebody went and what happened to them.
George, thank you so much for talking to us. We hope you find out news at some stage, and hopefully that's soon. Thank you. George Holland, whose great aunt Nellie Heriot went missing in Brighton at the age of 96.